So it's the 1st of November, 1755, All Saints' Day. Many of the residents of Lisbon are in church. The royal family is away from the city. It's gone out to the countryside, not in the royal palace. And at about 9:30 a.m., the first tremors of the earthquake are felt, pretty light at first, but nonetheless alarming to citizens. And then around 9:40, you have 3 very strong tremors hit the city, and a lot of the residents who had been celebrating the Feast of All Saints in the churches are killed immediately, with many of the churches and cathedrals and also monasteries collapsing, and those that fled out to the harbor, in fact, witnessed a quite remarkable sight, because they looked out and initially the water had receded. Then a tidal wave, a massive tidal wave, struck the city, sweeping out many of the people who were on the harbor itself. This was an unprecedented event. Today it's estimated that it was a magnitude 8 earthquake. There was, of course, no recording equipment at the time. The estimates are this was the most powerful earthquake in Europe in the past 10,000 years. There were aftershocks that reached North Africa, that were felt even as far as Brazil.
This earthquake was almost like the 9/11 of the 18th century. And I say that only because it had ramifications for the entire, for Europe, all across Europe. About 60,000 people perished. When the news broke slowly that this cataclysm had taken place, people started to question basic things like religion. So it was thought, well, if there's a benevolent God that looks after the world, how could he do such an unjust thing as to set an earthquake on the day when most people are involved in worship? And in fact, it was this very event that led Voltaire, very famously, to dismiss a philosophical movement we call philosophical optimism, which is that we live in the best of all possible worlds. And what happens is right because it's ordained by God. And Voltaire was very violently opposed to this idea, and he said that we can wish for happiness, but it's beyond our reason to wish for anything more, because the world possibly is governed by the forces of nature rather than some benevolent God. The work that we're performing in our first concert is actually linked to this earthquake. Telemann's Die Donner Ode in German, or the Thunder Ode, was written in response to this earthquake. And there was a special day of penitence that was put in, a day of mourning, as it were, for the victims. And this piece was performed in Hamburg. It became one of Telemann's most famous pieces, and it was performed over and over again. You'd expect a composer to write a lamentation in response to this extraordinary event, but actually Telemann responds in classic Protestant fashion with a celebration of the forces of nature. So rather than lamenting the deaths of these people, the populace, he wrote this piece in celebration of the forces of nature, but also it was in thanks that this catastrophe didn't visit his city of Hamburg and that they were spared. It's an extraordinary work, and I'm really excited to present it here in Australia for the first time.